Welcome to episode 16 of Traveling Science. G'day legends, welcome back to Traveling Science, the podcast that's sharing science with the world. My name's Crowe and I'm the Traveling Scientist, coming to you today from my home in Aireys Inlet in Australia. I'm a health science communicator, and on this podcast, we interview researchers, doctors, and experts, hearing their stories and sharing their ideas that can help us to live smarter, happier, and healthier lives. This week's guest is Immunologist Kellen Cavagnero. Kellen is a Ph.D. candidate at the University of California in San Diego, and his work focuses on understanding the innate branch of the immune system, how it defends against pathogens, and how it contributes to autoimmune and allergic disease. He's published articles in Nature, Science Translational Medicine, and the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology. And during our discussion today, Kellen answers questions including, why does our body attack itself sometimes? How we might prevent autoimmune diseases in the future? What are fibroblasts and why are they important? How the two different arms of your immune system work? What is the best way to treat psoriasis? How your skin health can impact gut health? And is inflammation good or bad? And we also discuss things like the Inflammatory Content podcast, Staphylococcus aureus, neutrophils, single-cell RNA sequencing, sweet syndrome, eczema, allergies, acne, and engineering the optimal microbiome. But just before that interview, I'd like to quickly share a review of the podcast with you. Unfortunately, I don't have any new reviews this week, which is a bit depressing. So if you could do me a solid and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, that would just be awesome. It takes like 2 seconds and it would make me very happy. But sad Jessie aside, let's learn all about allergies and autoimmune disease with the one and only Kellen Cavagnero. Kellen Cavagnero, welcome to Traveling Science.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to be here. I posted on Instagram about this discussion, and lots of people are super interested to learn all about immunology and autoimmune diseases and your research. So I've got a bunch of listener questions coming up and lots of great discussion to be had. But maybe just to get started, would you like to tell everyone what exactly did you study at university?
Yeah, I graduated from the University of California, Santa Barbara, Pharmacology, bachelor's there. And after completing my bachelor's, I moved back home to San Diego, where I am currently, and I started working in immunology. And I did that for about 5 years in between my bachelor's, and now I am in my Ph.D., finishing up my Ph.D. also at UC San Diego. So pharmacology to start, and then now I've shifted more towards immunology.
Now, I'm sure you all probably know this, but just to clarify, pharmacology is the study of drugs and how they work in our bodies. Fun fact, I studied pharmacology for years, thinking if all else fails, I can go work in a pharmacy. Yeah, nah, turns out that pharmacy and pharmacology, two different things. Go figure. Anyway, immunology is the study of our immune systems, those things that protect us from getting sick. Like when some random sneezes next to you on the train and you think, well, dang, guess I'm getting COVID soon. But then you don't, you can thank your immune system for that one. Now, Kellen, like me, studied pharmacology, aka drugs, and immunology, aka the immune system. So I asked him, why? Why'd you do that?
But when I finished school, I dealt with some personal health issues, some autoimmune, allergic issues, and I think a lot of times we kind of invest a lot of time trying to work on the things we're passionate about, right? And I really wanted to understand myself, right? So I was very passionate about immunology, but I hadn't studied it. So I started working in immunology and just fell in love with the science.
Very cool. So it was almost a bit of a self-interest, like wanting to learn more about the science of you.
Yes.
What exactly are you working on now? What are you doing in the lab currently?
So what I am working on now is all based on what a previous postdoc in our lab, I'm in Richard Gallo's lab at UC San Diego. He is a dermatologist and the chair of the Department of Dermatology. And he's had a lab for about about 30 years now. And my work is based on a postdoc's work in the lab. And what she found was very, very interesting. So many people listening to this, I'm sure, will know of the microbe Staphylococcus aureus or Staph aureus, staph infection. That's what we're talking about here. It's a major cause of skin and soft tissue infections in humans. Many people have probably had a staph infection, and it's becoming a big problem, especially because of the rise in antibiotic resistance, these resistant superbugs. So people may also have heard of MRSA, which is methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. So that is the superbug version. And we study, part of the lab studies the pathogenesis, how this microbe causes disease in the skin. And with this postdoc, Ling Zhang, who's now runs her own lab in China, what she found was that when you infect a mouse's skin with Staph aureus, the bacteria will actually cause cells in your skin that are called fibroblasts, which are really not appreciated for their role in immune responses.
So fibroblasts are like structural cells that are found all over the body. But turns out that during certain infections, the fibroblasts turn into fat cells and release antimicrobials to fight the bacterial infection, which was a pretty surprising discovery. So now Kellen is trying to figure out,
what else are these fibroblasts doing? Are they just making this antimicrobial peptide? It can't just be that. What else are they doing? We've just like cracked the surface. Like what else? And so my whole Ph.D. has been focused on understanding what else these fibroblasts do to promote host defense in the skin.
I feel like I studied microbiology and bacteriology and virology and immunology, and I don't remember ever really learning about those specific cells. I guess they were just kind of like pushed aside and be like, they're not the important ones. We need to look at the T cells and the dendritic cells. And so now you're looking at these fibroblasts and what they can do. Have you discovered anything yet, or you're working on it?
Yeah, I have discovered something pretty cool, or it's a team effort, the whole lab. We have discovered some pretty cool things, and we use some really cool cutting edge technology to make these findings. I use this technique called single cell RNA sequencing, which essentially allows me to look at from a single sample of a piece of skin. I can see what all the different cell types are in there and all the different genes that they're expressing. And I can do this in a mouse that is uninfected and a mouse that's infected. And then using computational techniques, this is very big data. Imagine an Excel sheet that is 20,000 columns, one for each gene, and then 20,000 rows for each cell in that sample. So imagine a very big Excel sheet. You need a supercomputer and some sophisticated methodology to analyze that. So it's very, very math heavy. And what I can do is basically predict with these data which cells are talking to which other cells in a mouse that has no disease and a mouse that has disease. And what we found was really unsurprising. We found that there's a really strong communication axis between fibroblasts and neutrophils.
So neutrophils are a common kind of immune cell or white blood cell, and they only last for a few days, but your body makes around 100 billion new neutrophils every single day. Isn't that insane? Anyway, neutrophils are like the security guards, constantly circulating through your blood and your tissue, and if they detect anything dangerous, they attack it.
They get recruited from the blood and the bone marrow into the tissue, and they will just essentially blow up and kill the pathogen. And, I like to share that, when you get an infection and it gets pus filled in it, that's really dead neutrophils. So we didn't really know how exactly neutrophils got into tissue. I made this hypothesis using this big fancy data, and then I did some in vitro studies. So now this is in like a dish in the lab. I took fibroblasts and I took neutrophils, and I tested whether fibroblasts could talk to the neutrophils. Could they activate them? Could they recruit them? And they were very potent at doing that. The best way to figure out if something is important for something else in biology is to remove it. So in mice, what we do is we knock out genes. And so if I have like gene X, right, and I have a mouse that's wild type, so it's nothing has been knocked out. It's just like normal wild type. And then I have like a clone of that mouse, but the only difference is that gene X is knocked out. And I see that when I infect these mice, that the gene X knockout mouse has way worse infection. That means that gene X is important for host defense against the bacteria. So that's how we figure out what things are important. So the thing that I really had to do that was really important is to demonstrate the significance of the fibroblasts. I showed, based on the single cell data, that they could do it. The in vitro data showed that they could do it. But really, the thing that showed that it was important is by doing these conditional knockout mice, where I knocked out a gene, not just in the whole mouse, but just in the fibroblasts. So that was like definitive information that fibroblasts were important for host defense.
That sounds incredible. I can't even begin to imagine how you figured out from all of the possible genes that you could knock out to find the right one that you could, and then remove it specifically just from a specific cell in that animal and prove that it produces a completely different response. That's awesome. And so is it safe to say that the goal of your PhD is to find out more about what these fibroblasts, what their role is in immune responses?
Yes, for sure. I think because my mentor, Rich, is a dermatologist, a lot of my work is focused on the skin. I have become a fibroblast expert. I didn't set out to necessarily become one. Like that whole single cell stuff, that could have taken me on a totally different path, but it took me down the fibroblast path again. And I'm still doing some more of that sort of stuff, but in new disease contexts. Like I'm actually studying some more rare autoimmune diseases now using a similar approach. And depending on what those unbiased investigations yield, I could be studying a different cell type. But if the fibroblasts come up again, maybe it's a sign that should be my thing. But it's all pretty much skin right now.
Right. What are these rare diseases? Are they something we would have heard of, or are they like super rare?
If you're a dermatologist, you might say that they're not that rare, but I say they're rare because most people haven't heard of them. And so Sweet syndrome is one of them.
Sweet syndrome, also known as acute febrile neutrophilic dermatosis, and it looks like a really, really bad rash, which is associated with fever, headaches, and joint pain. Sweet syndrome.
It's not sweet, doesn't seem very sweet. All of the diseases I'm interested in fall under this category of neutrophilic dermatoses. These are skin inflammatory conditions that are characterized by a ton of neutrophils. One disease that is considered a neutrophilic dermatoses that you may have heard of, or I'm sure you have heard of, is psoriasis.
Psoriasis is an autoimmune condition in which the immune system is overactive, which causes your skin cells to multiply too quickly. And this results in patches of skin that are inflamed and peeling, almost like scales. And fun fact, your boy has psoriasis. Runs in my family. And not gonna lie, it's pretty annoying.
That is a neutrophilic dermatosis. It's not usually called that, but that's what it is. It's tons of neutrophils. It's inflammatory, non-infectious.
Right. Very cool. Are autoimmune diseases, are they curable, or is it something when you've got it, you've got it and you've just got to treat it as best you can?
So not many things are curable these days. Unfortunately, we have very good treatments. Psoriasis, there's the development of, and this kind of relates to what I discovered in the lab, one of the really good treatments for psoriasis are monoclonal antibodies. So these fall under the category of biologics. These are drugs that are antibodies, and they block things. You know, they're proteins, they're antibodies, right? And so the monoclonal antibodies against members of the IL-17 pathway are very good at treating psoriasis. Effectively, it seems curing it in most patients.
IL-17, or interleukin-17, is a pro-inflammatory cytokine, i.e. it's something in your body that makes your skin go all red and rashy. Therefore, by targeting the IL-17 pathway with specific antibodies, it's going to greatly reduce inflammation in skin diseases like psoriasis. But this got me thinking about inflammation in general, because inflammation literally translates to setting something on fire, which is usually bad. So, is inflammation always bad? I thought that inflammation could certainly be good for a lot of things, but sometimes it can also be really bad.
No, yeah, it's absolutely critical for an effective immune response. Like inflammation is really just cells coming in, right? And when you have like neutrophil inflammation into the skin with a Staph aureus infection, you need those neutrophils in there to kill the bacteria. What is a problem is when when the inflammation does not resolve, when becomes chronic, when those cells don't leave. Because neutrophils, they also, the same things that allow them to kill the bacteria also damage us. So you have a lot of damaged tissue, and then you have simultaneous damage plus repair processes going on. You might have mutations caused by all of the DNA damage that's happening, maybe leading to cancer. Like chronic inflammation is no good.
No, and so therein essentially lies autoimmune diseases. It's when the inflammation is arising for the wrong reason, or it's not doing what it should be doing. This is usually an autoimmune disease. Is that correct, or roughly?
Yeah, I think that's accurate to say.
Yeah. Can you tell me the difference? I know you study mostly the innate arm of the immune system. Can you explain what that is and how it's different to the non-innate part of the immune system?
Yes. So innate, as the name suggests, you are born with it. Adaptive is something that you train over time. You adapt.
Okay, so Kellen is about to explain how our immune system works from the moment a pathogen, like a virus or bacteria, invades your body. So imagine, here it comes, it's landing on your skin, and
the first thing that's going to happen is you have recognition of a bacteria. That's the first thing that happens when you have an infection is, okay, you have to recognize the burglar in your house, right? And this happens through like pattern recognition receptors. This is all very innate immune response because you are born with these pattern recognition receptors that we've evolved to detect a bunch of different types of issues, and that is very innate. And then those epithelial cells will make cytokines, and those cytokines will attract other innate cells like neutrophils and monocytes, macrophages to come in and take care of the problem. It's all non-specific, right? Because this response will happen with, no matter which kind of bacteria you put on the skin, it will happen.
Yeah, those are all just sort of general cells that will attack anything that seems foreign.
Right. They don't discriminate. They're any and all comers. They're going to take care of it. Cytokines, like production of cytokines, is a very innate thing, right? Because those cytokines are protein messengers that will bring in other cells to do some function. Where you get into the adaptive immune system is when you start talking about B cells and T cells, cells that have receptors that recognize very specific amino acid sequences on proteins, and these could be self proteins, ideally not, right? Because that's what causes autoimmunity, and pathogens. And those very specific sequences, you are born with T cells and B cells that will. It's amazing how the diversity of sequences that you are born with and that you can potentially react to. But when you see something for the first time, you really need for those T cells and B cells to undergo a developmental process to turn into the really powerful fighting immune cells. So like the first time you see something, you won't really have that adaptive immune response. It really takes about 2 weeks. And then once that kicks in, then you have a very powerful immune response against that thing. And this is what, vaccination is built on, is the adaptive immune response. You're giving yourself a little bit of the thing that you expect to come knocking at your door, and then once that thing comes, you recognize it and you can defend yourself.
Yeah, your immune system starts training an immune response specifically toward that thing. So if you encounter the disease that you've been vaccinated for, it's not new, it's not foreign, it can't sneak in because your immune system is ready, and it's like, that's the guy, let's get him.
Yeah, the wanted poster is up.
Yeah, always love that analogy. It sounds like the work you guys are doing in the lab is really incredible. Are there any big challenges that you're facing right now?
It's all a challenge, right? Science is an inherently difficult process because we don't know the answers. We're trying to find them.
It's a lot of trial and error and learn from mistakes and do it again and again and repetition.
I love the process. It is difficult. Sometimes it's difficult to get funding. We thankfully don't have that problem right now. Sometimes it's difficult to get your work published, despite it being very rigorous and significant. That can be a problem, and I think every scientist deals with the stress of trying to just get their work out, which is kind of silly, right? Because that shouldn't be the case. We should just do good work, and then it should be out there, and it should help other people do good work and build on that. But sometimes the whole industry of journals and publication, and it can be very cumbersome and inhibit the dispersion of good science. It inhibits the process, and so that can be kind of frustrating. That the politics are frustrating, but I love the science.
Yeah, being in the lab, it's a good time. I want to ask you a little bit about yourself, because how I actually found out about your work was by reading an article in Nature that you had started your own science podcast. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I have a science podcast, and I first, I think I came up with the name, and once I came up with the name, I was like, I gotta actually make this a thing because it's such a great name. So the name is Inflammatory Content. So I thought that was just like
pretty much your life anyway.
Perfect. So it's like, all right, I have a name. I bought a domain name for it. I gotta actually make the thing now, and I have a lot of experience like teaching undergrads in the lab, and I really like teaching. I really like investing in the next generation of scientists and seeing them grow. It's a very rewarding process. And one thing though that I came to realize is the lack of scalability the kind of teaching that I was doing had. So in the lab, I could have a couple students and no more really at a time, because I had to do all my other stuff and teach them. And I wanted to really do something where I could scale. I could teach more people. I could have more impact and share the knowledge I was sharing with these students in a more endurable way. So I listen to a lot of podcasts. I always have. I love the medium. And it just kind of occurred to me one day, I was like, why don't I just make a podcast? Let's just, one thing I do all the time is journal club. This is a very common thing that scientists do. It's where we pick an article and, we'll sit around a room, and one person will go through the article, and we kind of nitpick things and, really dig into the paper, things that we like, things that we don't like, were their conclusions justified. And I do this all the time. And these presentations, I put a lot of work into them, and only maybe 30 people max will attend, and then poof, it's gone. And so it's like, wait a minute.
That was a lot of effort for not a lot of sharing.
Yeah. I think I could just do all that same work, but record it and then put it online, and maybe some student, who would love to be a fly on the wall in that room could do that. Right. And so essentially that's what I did. I started with my phone. I started just recording these journal clubs. I didn't just record what I was presenting. I did it actually before, and I gave a little bit more background info because I wanted to cater to the audience, which I think is really trainees. And, started putting them out there. And then once I built a nice little body of work, I started asking my buddies if they wanted to come on, and so I'd interview them when they'd publish papers. I started with a postdoc in my lab, Alan O'Neill, who's a great postdoc, a really, really smart guy. And, people loved it. And then I asked my PI, Rich Gallo, to come on, thesis committee members next. And, one thing led to another, and it just kind of turned into a thing. And it's been really fun.
Yeah, incredible. I think it's such a good opportunity to be able to share your work and also speak with incredible people like that, like yourself, like we're doing here now. And just some of those conversations you can have would just be valuable to so many people. So it's awesome. I've listened to quite a few of your episodes, and I've learned a lot, and would definitely recommend anyone who's interested in immunology or even just in science in general to go check out Inflammatory Content podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you like it.
Yeah, no, it's part of the inspiration for this podcast. So that's very cool. And what do you do when you're not in the lab? When you're outside of science? What do you do in your spare time? Do you have any spare time?
I'm doing science a lot. Yes. I love fitness. I love the outdoors. I love surfing. I exercise every single day. I have done that for a long time, and I, love to hike and go to happy hours. I like to cook. I really am inundated in the science right now, and it's such a great job. I do a lot of, as I mentioned before, computational work and also work at the bench, in the lab, and I'll spend maybe half my day in the lab and then the other half of the day on my computer. And I would do the coding thing. I would do it all for free. I would do it for fun. If I could, I would do it for free. But I really enjoy the data analysis, the coding thing. Like sometimes I'll come home on a Friday night and I'll just code. Like I'd love that. It's like a puzzle, and I do it for fun. And so I have to consciously strip myself away from the lab sometimes and the science to do other things. But yeah, life of a grad student is very different. You're living on very little money, but there's really no better life in terms of the freedom.
Doing good things. I imagine there's a lot of variety, so you wouldn't get too bored, and probably also super fulfilling, I would imagine. Kellen, I've got some listener questions for you if you've got a moment. But before that, each week here on Travelling Science, we make a donation to a charity of the guest's choosing. And this week, Kellen has chosen to make a donation to the GiveWell Top Charities Fund, which is basically a group that figures out which charities are in the greatest need and are also using their donations most effectively, and then sends the money directly to them. So this is a very effective way of making high-impact charitable donations. So a donation has been made to GiveWell on behalf of Kellen Cavagnero, and if you'd like to make a donation to them as well, you certainly can. Or if you'd like to support this podcast and the charities that we donate to every single week, you can certainly do that too, and that will be totally appreciated. Either way, both of those links are in the show notes just below. But now, back to Travelling Science. It's Dr. Mac. I was wondering, is there a link between gut health and autoimmune conditions?
100%. There are gastrointestinal autoimmune conditions. So like inflammatory bowel disease, for example, that is an inflammatory disease, and it is in your gut. So they are inextricably linked. But I think what the question may be trying to get at is, are there extra intestinal manifestations of lack of health in the gut? And yes, there is definitely evidence for that. And this is why the understanding of the gut microbiome has become so popular in the recent years, because it's very clear that mice that lack gut microbes have a lot of pathology elsewhere in the body. This isn't something that I personally work on right now. I may actually be doing something like this in my postdoc, though, so I could probably tell you a lot more in like 5 years.
Awesome.
But yes, they are definitely. But I can really quick tell you, though, something that you may not be aware of is that the health of your skin definitely impacts autoimmunity in other tissues. And this is something that I have worked on in my lab. Not my project, but my good friend Tatsuya Dakoshi, Dr. Tatsuya, he's a gastroenterologist in the lab, and he has found that skin injury, so when you injure your skin, it can make your gut disease worse. So there's a known clinical association, like people with IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, are often at increased risk of skin diseases like some of these neutrophilic dermatoses. And so Tatsuya set out to understand if there was a mechanism underlying that. Was it like the skin causing the gut disease, or the gut disease causing the skin disease? And I think he's still trying to understand if the gut disease can affect the skin. I'm sure it does. He hasn't really figured that out yet, but he figured out a very cool mechanism by which the skin communicates with the gut and makes gut disease worse.
Wow. So we need to protect our skin as best we can. Does that mean like we should be moisturizing or just not injuring ourselves?
I don't know if I can prescribe anything at this point, but I would say don't freak out if you get, a boo-boo, um, but
It's good to know.
you could speculate that maybe, protecting your barriers, protecting your skin, like not having like if your skin's very dry, this is all speculation, perhaps that would allow more injury there and could potentially impact other parts of your body. So, I think, having an intact skin barrier through whether using lotion or limiting like dryness or other injuries, like I think that would help.
Very cool. There you go. Natsuki Footy Mason is wondering, sort of going back to basic immunology, why does the body attack itself sometimes?
This a lot of time gets to the autoimmune sort of question, the adaptive immune response attacking itself, which is not my area of expertise, but this usually will happen because of a lack of tolerance. Like tolerance is the process by which the immune system, and it's aptly named, right, can tolerate these self antigens. And there's central tolerance that happens in the thymus, where thymus for T, where your T cells develop. This is where you will select for cells that are not reactive against yourself. There's also peripheral tolerance, where you have cells like regulatory T cells that are suppressing immune responses. And so you can imagine if these tolerance mechanisms are interfered with, both during like T cell development and in the periphery, like you have more T cells that are reacting to self, you have less Tregs to suppress the immune response, then these autoreactive T cells will flourish and cause disease.
Right. So it's basically, you'd say it's a mistake that occurs during this tolerance phase that can lead to cells that are just a bit not quite calibrated properly, I suppose. Anala Cooper was wondering if there are any autoimmune diseases that we didn't know were autoimmune diseases. Do you know any of those that stand out?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is this sweet syndrome that I mentioned earlier, this neutrophilic dermatoses. So this disease kind of, if like you didn't know the literature, you'd probably think it was a very bad skin infection. Like I was actually, looking at some pictures of this yesterday.
Holy moly, that is disgusting. Why do they call it sweet syndrome? That ain't sweet. Actually, it doesn't look that bad, but you've been warned. Google sweet syndrome at your own risk. And if you've ever experienced sweet syndrome, I feel for you.
And these lesions on the skin, they're like giant craters. Like it just looks like you have a flesh-eating bacteria infection, but they can't culture out any bacteria from them. They're often incorrectly treated with antibiotics, doesn't do anything. And so, then the physician will realize, oh, this is maybe sweet syndrome, give them a course of oral steroids, and it seems to be resolved. So there are, I think, the scientific community as a whole understands that sweet syndrome is an autoimmune disease, but a given clinician in the clinic may see a patient with this and think it's an infection when it's an autoimmune condition.
Nothing But a Pack of Cards was wondering if you know anything about the cause or the pathogenesis of fibromyalgia. Is that related to the fibroblasts? Do you know anything about that one?
I know a bit about fibromyalgia, but I don't think it has a relation to fibroblasts. I could be wrong. My understanding is that fibromyalgia is, it's a pain disorder. And my understanding is that it's still very poorly understood for its cause and potential treatments. I know it's being worked on. People are investigating that in the pain and, neuroscience fields, but it's not something that I spend a lot of time thinking about.
Fair enough. That's okay. Nothing But a Pack of Cards also wanted to know about psoriasis, and she was wondering, well, one, why does it happen? and is there anything we can do to treat it or prevent it from getting worse? I know you spoke to this a bit earlier.
Prevention is difficult. It is a multifactorial disease, meaning that the way it develops is through many different causes. So it's really tough to prevent. When you have these multifactorial diseases, there's likely a genetic component, there's an environmental component. I don't know of any good evidence for psoriasis prevention, but for treatment, what we mentioned earlier about the monoclonal antibodies against the IL-17 pathway and also other members of other pro-inflammatory cytokines like TNF-alpha, those are very effective treatments. And there are very good treatments for psoriasis, but cures, I don't believe there's anything curative, and prevention, I don't believe there's any solid evidence for prevention. But this is something that we hope to figure out. Prevention is really the goal, right? Prevention is the goal. It not only alleviates a lot of suffering, it is cost effective because patients no longer have to go into doctors and pay for medications. And, the insurance companies don't have to charge these giant rates for these drugs, and monoclonals are very expensive, these biologics. And, prevention is ideal. And that's something that the research community has historically been very good about finding therapeutic targets and developing therapeutics. Vaccines are preventative, right? That's a very successful prevention story there. But for inflammatory diseases, I think a lot of the promise will be in the microbiome field and using microbes to prevent some of these inflammatory diseases. Like, this is not possible really at the moment, but we have these microbes that exist, in our skin, on our gut, in our lungs, and these microbes can really be thought of as part of our immune system, and they're modifiable. We can put bacteria in, we can take bacteria out, we can edit a certain bacteria, and this is all happening in the research space now. And one could dream that, one day we can prevent diseases by understanding what the optimal microbiome looks like, and we can engineer you to have that microbiome so as to set your immune system up for success and not cause issues. And so that really, I think, is a promising area of investigation for the future.
Wow, that's really cool to think about. Just a couple more listener questions. I've got one from Sadie LC, and she just says, eczema. Is eczema an autoimmune disease? And do you know anything about it?
Yes. So eczema, also known more in the scientific world as atopic dermatitis, is a skin inflammatory disease. I'd also put it under, how I was mentioning earlier, the kind of difficulty with classification of like autoimmune versus allergic versus inflammatory. This is one where you could think of it's sometimes thought of as an allergic disease because it looks a lot like other allergic diseases like asthma, like like what the cells are all doing. It looks like asthma, but it's also really just like probably just an inflammatory disease. Like it might not require a lot of those adaptive immune cells. So it is definitely an inflammatory disease. This is something that my lab is doing that is super exciting. We have clinical trials going on in our lab to treat atopic dermatitis or eczema. And this is all led by Dr. Teru Nakatsuji, my good friend in the lab. And what he has found is that you don't really want to say anything is good or bad, but in the context of atopic dermatitis, there's some good bacteria and bad bacteria. And what he has found is that the good bacteria kill the bad bacteria that help cause the disease. And so what he's doing is applying that good bacteria to patient's skin and seeing that it's killing the bad bacteria and reducing the symptoms. And this is all still in progress. I think he's in phase 2 clinical trials right now. They're, I think, trying to get funding to do the big trial. And he's using the same, with others in the lab, using the same approach to treat acne also, another inflammatory skin disease. And so, again, I think this whole microbe thing is very promising. And, the clinical trial is focused on treatment, but you could imagine that you could do similar studies looking at prevention. before the disease even gets there, that bacteria that caught the bad bacteria is probably there first. So you probably put that good bacteria on early in life and prevent, possibly.
Very cool. That sounds incredible. So there you go, Sadie. There might be hope yet. And one more question, or maybe two. Mandy Alex Yoga is wondering, in general, is there ever going to be a cure for allergies one day? And Vegan Honey also said something about she's wondering if there's maybe anything she can do to deal with her recent intolerances that have developed for certain foods. So yeah, I wonder, people wondering about allergies in general, is there hope? And I suppose maybe it could be what you were just talking about, those sorts of microbial experiments.
Yeah, I would say I try to take the optimistic angle, ever. You said ever in the question. Ever is a long time. I hope, one day we can cure a lot of things. And I don't know how long that will take, but I guess this is an important time to note that we need more funding for science in the United States. We need our government, our Congress, to fund the NIH and the National Science Foundation. We need more funding. Right now, it's very difficult to do science. We are very limited with money, and if we were funded more properly, like we could do more experiments that are high risk. Right now, the government, when we write grants, we're often writing grants, proposing to do work that we've really already done, that we know will work, because they want low risk, they want sure bet, and the way we get to cures might not be through sure bets, it might be through high risk activity. So we really need more money. So what you can do to help is to advocate for science and funding for science. It's very important for progress, not just in terms of the science and medicine, but for society. So, that's how you can help us try to get to the bottom of these things.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I feel, like you said, it's good to have an optimistic outlook and believe that there will be cures for allergies and intolerances and all sorts of things. They are coming, but they will require research, and research requires money, and most governments are putting just not enough funding in. So hopefully anyone important listening can help in any way you can to make some of these changes that need to happen. But there we go. Thank you so much for answering those listener questions, Kellen. It was awesome.
Thank you for the listeners for their questions.
Just to finish off, I've got a quick lightning round, if you're ready. 6 questions, 60 seconds. First thing that comes to your head. First question, have you ever thought about giving up your research and just going full Breaking Bad?
Breaking Bad. I'm going to say no. I love the show, though.
It was a cool show. Yes, no, I think your research is probably a little more important, maybe a little bit safer. If you could have done something completely different with your life, say if you never ended up studying science, what do you think you might have done?
When I was growing up, I wanted to be a chef. I think cooking is a lot like science, though. It's kind of cheating. But I also almost majored in finance at one point. Either a cook or a businessman, maybe.
Oh, nice. What do you love most about immunology? What's your favorite part?
I love the puzzle. I love trying to put the pieces together, understand the mechanisms, how things are happening. That's what I love, puzzles.
Awesome. What do you hate about immunology? What's the worst part?
There's aspects of the job of being an immunologist, like the funding and the dealing with the journals. That stuff I'm not super fond of. It's frustrating when it goes wrong, right? Especially for yourself or your loved ones, right? When you have a problem and you can't figure it out, that's very frustrating. I hate seeing people suffer, for sure.
Yeah, but the best way to deal with that is to just keep on going and giving your best, right? If you had $1 million, for example, and some free time, what sort of experiments would you be focusing on? What do you think is super important right now?
Well, what I'm working on right now with the sweet syndrome, I think understanding that disease would has potential to be very high impact because there's just so little known about it. So, $1 million is a lot of money. I think I'd probably hire a technician to help me do experiments in the lab so I could go faster, and I would maybe pay myself a little bit more too.
Do you have a favorite autoimmune disease?
I'm very interested in the ones that affect the barrier tissues because that's what I've I've done historically, but I can get interested in anything. So I guess my favorites are currently just the ones that I've looked at most recently, but they're all fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kellen, for coming on today. It's awesome to hear about your research in the field of immunology, some of the diseases you've been working on, and some of the stuff your lab is doing and the people around you. It sounds like we're really taking big steps in the world of understanding immunology and some autoimmune diseases, which are really affecting a lot of people. So thank you so much for all the work you do and for coming on the show today. I really appreciate having you here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Jesse. This has been a really, really fun conversation. And I also want to commend you on what you're doing too with the podcasts and science communicating. It's very important work to share what is going on in the lab. And we know from COVID, right, how important it is to just get good information out to people and how hungry people are for good information. So, cheers to you for doing that. I think it's really important.
Absolutely, Kellen. And same to you on your podcast as well. Everyone go listen to Inflammatory Content. And just to finish off today, considering everything we've discussed here, if you had one final piece of information or advice you'd like to share with our listeners, maybe something that they can take home to improve their lives in some way, do you have any final words of wisdom?
Yeah, like I mentioned before, it's disease prevention is really tough, but and curing things is really tough. And we really don't have good answers, but there are a few things that you can do. Exercising, doing some cardiovascular fitness and some weight training, like that is very good for you. And don't smoke and try not to be so stressed out. Have fun and enjoy your life. And I think hopefully having a very stress-free life and taking care of your body, that some of these things will resolve themselves, some of these inflammatory diseases. You can only hope, but yeah, take care of yourselves.
So there you have it, legends. That was Kellen Cavagnero, an incredibly intelligent and inspirational human. I read about Kellen's work in Nature and just contacted him out of nowhere, and he was gracious enough to come on the podcast and share his story with us. And what awesome work he's doing as well, investigating the inflammatory diseases that impact so many of us, and it sounds like treatments are only getting better. But just going back to Kellen's final words of wisdom, remember to take care of yourself. Make sure you're getting outside and getting plenty of exercise. It's great for both your physical and mental health. And remember to enjoy life. Try not to stress so much, just have fun. And if you enjoy listening to my conversation with Kellen Cavagnero, then you might also enjoy listening to his podcast, Inflammatory Content. Listen to that wherever you podcast, and he's also on Twitter @Kellen Cavagnero, and links are in the show notes just below. Make sure you're subscribed here for more Traveling Science every single week, and follow Traveling Science on Instagram to see who we're interviewing next, and there you can also send in your own listener questions. And finally, if you're more visually oriented, feel free to check out the Traveling Scientist YouTube channel. And if you stick around to the end of the episode, I always leave you with a little secret. And this week's secret is that my middle name is non-existent. I don't have a middle name, it's just Jesse Crowe. But if anybody asks, I tell them that my middle name is James, because I think that Jesse James Crowe would be a cool name. But my name's just Jesse Crowe. If I ever had a son, I'd probably call him Joe and give him the middle name Blow, because then his name would be Joe Blow Crowe, and I just think that's really funny, and he'd probably hate me. But that's just a future theoretical scenario. Probably won't happen. Anyway, thanks so much for listening, legends. I'll catch you all next Science Sunday. Cheers.